Imagine waking up to the sound of a groaning carriage. You hear the clacking of hooves on the road. The hair on the back of your neck stands up, and you get goosebumps. You wonder to yourself, should I look outside and see what's there? You take a peek out the window, but don't see anything. The sound of the wheels and the hooves gets louder and louder with each passing second. Then, silence. You think to yourself, oh no, it's just a bad dream, when you hear the rapping of bone on the door. Coffee and Calacas is a weekly podcast where we share stories of the supernatural, discuss mysticism, and explore the beyond. If this is something that interests you, then stick around and enjoy this week's episode. Between the ages of 7 and 18, my mom would often wake up with a fever in the middle of the night after experiencing a nightmare. It was always the same type of dream. There would be a horse-drawn carriage that would clack on the cobblestone streets of town, always carrying the dead inside. It was always without fail that my mom would be sick with a fever and retell her dream to my grandparents, and they would just dismiss it as a hallucination due to the high fever. Within 3 days of having that dream, someone close to the family would die. This went on for years and ended when my mom had that dream 3 days before my grandfather's death. So I ask, was it all a dream or a premonition? Which brings us to this week's topic, La Carreta de la Muerte. In Mexico, La Carreta de la Muerte is commanded by the last person to die on the last second of the year. It is their task to collect the souls of the dying throughout the year. It is said that death is someone that comes for you, except on the days of the dead, or El Dia de los Muertos. Or the death has been evaded and can be evaded, but never for long, because death will eventually come around in the end. Based off what I read, there was a story about a Mexican general named General Manuel Gonzalez, who became Mexico's 35th president. He evaded death 17 times. On one of those occasions, he was severely injured in war. It is said that his arm was shot off at the elbow. Not cut off, but shot off. So, due to the amount of pain that he was in, he decided that he wanted to end his life. So, he reached for his pistol and pulled the trigger. But it was jammed. One of his men saw what he was trying to do and kicked the pistol away from him, ultimately saving General Gonzalez's life. 3 days later, the soldier that saved the general's life died a tragic death. Because basically death came looking for him. Death wanted a body. It really reminded me of that movie, Final Destination, because in that movie, they explained that when you intervene in someone's behalf, when it's their time to die, then death skips that person and moves on to the person that intervened. So basically, General Gonzalez evaded death 17 times. And in those 17 times that he evaded death, the person that intervened on his behalf would always die 3 days later. It is said that when General Gonzalez finally did die, he welcomed death. He looked forward to it, which gave me a lot of Harry Potter vibes, with the whole Deathly Hallows. I think the person that had the cloak, when they finally took off their cloak, they welcomed death like an old friend. And that's kind of what General Gonzalez did. He was prepared to die a long time ago, but it just always happened that something would intervene on his behalf and he wouldn't end up dying. And instead, the person that would intervene would be the one to die. And what I did read was that the person that died would always die a very horrible death, very fatal, tragic death. And because death in Mexico likes for you to die a horrible death. Not sure why. I mean, I would figure, death would want you to just die, but apparently death has a preference on how you die. So The leyenda of La Carreta de la Muerte is found in many parts of Latin America, not just in Mexico. It is often known as La Carreta Chillona, La Carreta de la Bruja, and La Carreta Nagua. La Carreta Nagua is a legend from Nicaragua. It goes that in the middle of the night, while everyone was sleeping safely in their beds, a cart would roll through the streets of town. This cart was no ordinary cart, and was in fact being pulled by two skeletal horses and commanded by the Grim Reaper. If anyone was awake or in the streets when the cart rolled by, they would be claimed by the Grim Reaper and taken to the underworld. I looked into it, and all the stories that I read about it, yeah, you could not be awake, or you could not see the cart rolling by at that hour, because the moment you would, either you would die in 3 days, or something that tragic would happen in your life. Now, they say that this legend is based off the slavery and colonization of the native tribes. In many of the pueblitos, the native people already knew that the colonizers were coming for them, because they would hear the carts and the wagons, the wheels would be turning on the cobblestone and the dirt road and stuff. They would hear the horses. So the moment that they would hear that, they would run and hide, because they knew that they would be subject to a lot of abuse and harm at the hands of the colonizers, where those that were caught by them would always end up taking their lives rather than work for the colonizers and do their dirty deeds. But yeah, in every legend that I read, and it's not just in the Nicaraguan legends, the moment you were out at that hour, like at past midnight, they said that was the witching hour, the midnight. So if you were out past that hour, more than likely you would die, because you were taken by the Grim Reaper. Or if you saw the cart itself, by opening the door, you would eventually perish as well, because you saw the Grim Reaper. So you didn't actually have to be outside. You could actually just see it through the window and stuff. And there was this one story of this lady who opened the window, and because she heard the sound of like a wagon, a cart going through the streets in the night, and was, to be a little like nosy, she opened the window. Well, she'll move the curtain back, saw through the window that there was a wagon rolling by, and within 3 days, her neighbors say she ended up dying. So, it could be coincidence, who knows? La Carreta Chillona, as it is known, comes from El Salvador. In some areas of El Salvador, they refer to this carreta as La Carreta de la Bruja, La Carreta Bruja, which translates to the cart of the witch, or the witch cart. The legend begins in Spain when a little boy named Terencio Perez gets adopted by a priest named Fray Oviedo. The priest always was always good to the little boy and always tried to convince him to join the priesthood. But the kid wasn't interested. He was like, no, I'd rather not for me. So the priest understood, and he just implored to him, be a good man when you grow up, always help the people, always do good by the people, and you will end up in the kingdom of heaven. Well, when the priest died, the Terencio moved to a new town and began to work for a doctor. And he would always tag along with the doctor wherever he went for a phone call, to help people. He was always there because he was always interested in learning, not actually to help the people, but to benefit himself. So Terencio eventually learns enough, and he feels confident that he could practice medicine on his own, even though he wasn't an actual doctor or had the education to be one. But he felt, I've seen enough, I can do this. And so he took a ship to a distant land. Now, he convinced the people to help him get on the ship, and he's like, I'm a doctor, I'm trying to help people, but I'm a poor doctor because I never charge money. And the people believed him, and they're like, oh yeah man, get on the ship and we'll help you. And they took him to a distant land. Okay. And when he got to this land, he told the people of this new town, this village, that he was a doctor and that he would help the people of that village with modern medicine. And the people of the village were like, oh wow, there were natives, and they're like, yeah man, we're for this, but we appreciate your help. But he was wrong. He was lying to them, and the people of the village did believe him and would later die at his hands. One night when Terencio was walking back from a bar, he heard footsteps behind him, and so he walked a little faster, and the faster he walked, the faster the footsteps would pick up pace with him. And he then heard a voice, and the voice called to him, and he recognized the voice, but he was just like, what is that? Well, before he could even speak, the ghost of the priest had appeared to him and told him that he was being punished for killing so many people and taking advantage of the people in need rather than actually helping them. The priest told him that he was to construct a wagon made out of the bones of the people he let die on his watch. He now roams the earth collecting the souls of the dying as punishment, with a restless soul that will never enter the afterlife. The groaning sounds of the wagon are the cries of the dying as they cry out for help to be ushered into the next life. Now, I don't know. When I read that, I thought, wow, that's pretty dark, pretty intense. To think that because this kid wasn't dead, or Terencio wasn't dead at that point, but the stories say that when the ghost appeared to him, it just dragged him to hell, basically. It didn't give him an opportunity to live. It just said, okay, you've done wrong by the people, so you're gonna die and you're coming with me. So he basically was walking, he was alive but dead at the same time, if it makes sense. And yeah, he was destined to walk the earth or roam the earth collecting the souls of the people. And so that's what people say, or they call it la carreta, because it sounds like people crying. It sounds like something's crying. It's basically a rickety wagon, and the rickety wheel is what's creaking, and and I can see how something that is old and it creaks, it has that old groaning sound, so it could scare people. Now it's not just stories like this that come out. There's a show I believe it's in Mexico. It's called Lo que la gente cuenta. They've done an episode on La Carreta de la Muerte, and if you haven't watched it, I think you can find it on Google. It's the way it's done there, it's a little different, in the sense that it's kind of like Goosebumps for adults, okay? So yeah, they tell you, oh, la carreta de la muerte, la carreta will take you, and you will die if you are out in the streets, past a certain hour, right? So I believe in this show, there's a girl and some guy, and the guy just moved to the town because his mom had just passed away, and the girl tells him she died because la carreta took her. And the guy doesn't believe in none of this. He's real science-based, doesn't believe in legends and stuff like that. And he's like, no, there's no concrete evidence for this, so it didn't happen. And the girl is insisting on it. She's like, I know, I've heard talk that your mom was out past a certain hour, and it's la carreta that took her. Ultimately, in the end, it wasn't, yes, it was la carreta, but it wasn't la carreta, okay? So death came for her, but not in the way that you would expect. It's a good episode. I don't want to give it all away in case you do find it on YouTube. But it's interesting. Now, how this pertains to my mom, honestly, my mom was never told the legend of La Carreta de la Muerte as a kid. Okay, I talked to her recently, just to get some clarification on her dreams and stuff, and just to give me some insight as to when it first started to when it ended. If she's ever had the dream recently, things like that. And never, and I asked her, did you know of this legend? She's like, no, I didn't. She's like, I thought it was just something that I would dream of. I never, I never imagined that this had some kind of basis besides just my nightmares. So she was never told this as a kid. So why she would dream it, we don't know. But it would never fail that within 3 days of her having this dream, someone close to the family would always end up dying. Now, why, how it's connected, I don't know, but I know that death does come in threes. It's been said that, at least in my neighborhood where I grew up, it was always said that if someone in the neighborhood dies, expect another 2 more deaths after that, because death comes in threes. And I thought it was just something like una creencia de mi barrio, just something, to my neighborhood. But then I started working and I heard the same thing at work, that death comes in threes. So if someone dies within, well, not necessarily with my coworkers, because my coworkers haven't died, thankfully. But if one of their relatives would die, then 2 more would follow. And it never failed. So yeah, death would come in threes. Now, I don't know why death necessarily comes in threes, besides the Holy Trinity, but it does. It really does. Now, my mom would say that this was one of the worst nightmares that she would ever have. She would always end up feeling just confused and scared because she knew what was to come after that. And she said that she would cover her ears and she could literally hear the sound of the carriage as, wheels hitting the cobblestone. And it was so vivid that she would wake up crying. And that's when her parents, my grandma, my grandpa would be like, it's nothing, it's just because you're having a hallucination because your fever's so high. It's a calentura. But my mom would say it was more than just that. She's like, I felt something was wrong. And like I said, this happened for years. My mom says this started happening when she was about 7 years old, and it stopped just after or just before my grandfather died. My grandmother recently died in December, and I asked her, did you have the dream then? And she's like, no, I didn't. She's like, but I had a feeling that your grandma was going to die on a certain day, and she did. So, is it a premonition? Who knows? But somehow it is tied to death, and it was kind of like a warning, that something was going to happen. We just didn't know who it was going to happen to. Now, why death, chooses to come in a carriage? Who knows? But what we do know is that death awaits you, and death doesn't care who you are. It will eventually come knocking at your door. I really hope you enjoyed this week's episode on the death's carriage, or la Carreta de la Muerte. It was something kind of different for me, but I truly enjoyed recording it. You can follow Coffee and Calacas on social media. You can visit our webpage at calacaspod.com. That is CALACASPOD.com, where we have links to all our social media accounts. Like and subscribe and hit the notification bell to get informed of all our latest content. And remember that life begins after coffee.